Yeah. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Uh, I'll be chairing this session today, or this second session of the day. And our first speaker today is Sue van Rensburg, and she's from Ceylon. Huh? Yeah. So she'll be speaking again about the Maputoland grasslands and a community-centered approach. So we look forward to your presentation. Thanks, Sue.
Vertically challenged. Morning, everyone. And a very big thank you to Londiwe for making such a great introduction to the project yesterday. Before we start, I'd just like to take a moment for you all to reflect on what it feels like to be needed and to make a difference. Because there are many people in this room who have the skills to do that for these very vulnerable communities up in northern Maputoland. And tomorrow we're going to be talking in a policy to practice workshop about the concern of woody encroachment into montane grasslands. Well, the same sorts of things are happening in Maputoland. On that side, I'm dyslexic, so I'm just see where the pointer is. That is a beautiful Thamida grassland, very rare in that area, and many of the areas are becoming encroached. And of course, we've got the scourge of, oh, sorry, I didn't say scourge, the challenge of eucalyptus plantations in the area. Right, so, whoops, there we go. That one. Okay, so there are many diverse ecosystems within this area. It's a groundwater-driven system, as you heard yesterday, and sensitive to localized rainfall. Lake Sibaya, as you should all know, is South Africa's largest freshwater lake. It's oligotrophic, and it's essentially a reflection of the groundwater table. It's all connected. So there are no rivers within this area. The first people to do a vegetation map in the area were Atkin and Gale, who kind of traipsed there on a donkey. It's wonderful to read their account. And they described a landscape that was relatively open, with lala palms there that people make lala wine from, which Sachin evidently enjoys. And they knew there must have been water below the surface because they found all these Ndoni trees dotted around. And if you sort of scratched down in the sand, you came across water. So a little bit later, Eugene Moll used to traipse around the area, and these are some of his photos from the early 60s and 70s. Relatively open, grassy landscape. This is what you'll see there today, if you can find a patch that's been untransformed. So you can see a bit of a woody encroachment there. And these grasslands are really important for people. So the household data we collected demonstrated that more households benefit from natural resources and grassland resources than they do from eucalyptus plantations. There's a common narrative that the eucalyptus is needed to support livelihoods, but we actually didn't find that at the household level. And yeah, they're just incredible systems, very unique. They're used for a lot of cultural purposes. The previous king used to get his lala wine from there, and the reeds for the traditional ceremonies. They also have incredible ecological value. The Maputoland grasslands are quite unique grasslands in the Indian Ocean coastal belt biome. Michelle's nodding her head. You don't find them really anywhere else, and there is very little left. But the data we've been collecting in the project has essentially, and we've used eddy covariance tiles and surface renewal, has shown that the grasslands have got a very low evapotranspiration rate compared to the eucalyptus plantations. So essentially that means they use less water. And they are the best land cover for enabling recharge into the groundwater. So when it rains, that's the best cover that allows the most recharge into the groundwater, which is what we want. So they need to be protected at all costs. That's what happens when you take a hydrologist into the field. Right, so there are a lot of threats to these grasslands. I think you know about most of them. I'm particularly worried about Parthenium coming in on the side, but essentially very, very rapid transformation. And there's this declining water table, which has compromised the wetlands. So previous wetlands that people would never have gone into, they are now going into those, and that further compromises the water table. This is the lake level data for Lake Sabaya, which I took quite a long time in correcting from the DWS record. It's from 1960 all the way through to, I think that's 2001. And you can see these peaks. It's very responsive to rainfall events. And that event there corresponds to that photo, which is when the research station had to be evacuated. Don't put your research station in a Karoo plain. It's the floodplain. So the red bar at the top here, so this is just sort of from 2010 to 23. That is the extent of time that that system has been below the ecological drought reserve set by DWS. And the orange dots are when the South Basin became separated from the main basin, which was in about 2015. And everybody got really worried. And then they started worrying about it because the gauge plates were all out of the water and nobody was collecting any data. But we then stepped in and started collecting data. And despite recent rainfalls, I can confirm that the system is still below the ecological reserve. So with this water table decline, we've seen a decline in ecosystem services and huge degradation in the system. So this is Vazi Pan. It's a 7,000-year-old peatland just to the north of Lake Sabaya. And that's what it looks like today. And if you were with Eugene in the 60s, sorry, you would have, whoa, this thing's going, it's like my dyslexic brain. In 65, that is the Vazipan wetland, and in 2016, it burnt out. It's burnt repeatedly. And yeah, when peat burns, you know something's gone wrong, because for peat to form, it takes a permanently wet system. So there's something's tipped in the system. Right, so yesterday you heard about our engagements. We wanted to understand what the challenges were from both the leader perspective as well as the household perspective. And then essentially the idea was to understand from past to present, looking at land use change, climate analysis, understanding aquifer processes a little bit better, what's actually going on in the system and what's causing these water table declines. So it was very much a scaled approach. The climate analysis took place at a larger catchment scale. And the groundwater modeling that we did, well, surface groundwater modeling is essentially the purple gridded area. It's the largest model we've done for that. And it used a dynamic vegetation change for the area. And then essentially the response variable is Lake Sabaya to see what the water levels are doing. So what the climate results from our UCT collaborators found is that there had been below average rainfall since 2000. But more importantly, there had been a complete reduction in the number of extreme rainfall events. So those are rainfall events of over 30 mils. And then we had our isotope data from our UKZN colleagues, which showed that you only see aquifer recharge from rainfall events that are over 30 mils. So that was pretty cool. And then our groundwater data from Sayon shows that this graph is essentially two paired wells, a deep well and a shallow well, fairly close to the lake, and the rainfall record. And it confirmed that when you have rainfall events of over 30 mils, and if you have them sequentially, you start seeing rainfall recharge. So that all fitted together quite nicely. Then we used the SANLEC data to try and get a dynamic land cover change over time, but we found it was wrong. So I spent a lot of time correcting that, and essentially decrease in grasslands, decrease in wetlands, increase in thicket, but you don't see that in the numbers because it's taken over by the settlements. And these have all had impacts on people's livelihoods. With the lack of water for livestock. So this just gives you the South Basin, which is separated from the main basin. This is a feeder stream in the north. So you can see there's been massive transformation in that area. So what caused this? And one of the things we did is we took forestry out of the system in the lake level simulations. And you can see from past to present, even if you take forestry out, there's a decline in the water level, and that shows a very distinct climate signature showing how sensitive this area is to local rainfall. If it doesn't rain, the groundwater table will go down, but the forestry influence pushed that system below the ecological reserve. people's livelihoods and the ecosystem degradation would not have taken place in the absence of forestry. Sorry, Mondi. But then we wanted to say, okay, that's what's happened now. But if we make a choice today based on the community aspirations, what would happen into the future? And then we put all of that data into a systems model with economics and the household survey data. And the idea was to say, what choices today can either improve or make worse the challenges that they'd identified? We tested a whole bunch of different scenarios based on their preferences under an extreme wet climate and 2 dry climates. And there's reasons for that, which I can explain in lunchtime. So essentially, what really worries me is even in a wetter climate than we've ever seen, in terms of the status quo, if we change nothing on the land surface, the lake water levels do not recover to the previous high stands by 2050. And obviously, if we have continued dry periods without these extreme rainfall events, the system basically collapses. Also with forestry, if there'd never been any forestry there and we have a very wet future with lots of extreme rainfall events, the system does recover. But even if we take out all the forestry and we have 60 years of below average rainfall with no extreme events, obviously you get system collapse. So these are extremes, but the upper wetter extreme, the fact that it's not improving makes me a little bit worried. They also wanted us to look at bush encroachment, which we did, and we found there was a slightly negative impact of bush encroachment on the system, but we're busy collecting more data on the evapotranspiration of that. And we'd like to do what we did similarly with the no forestry scenario to really disentangle and make sure we're attributing these declines to the right things, because we need that as evidence to push the forestry back. Then there was a systems model that we developed with all sorts of economics, and we said, okay, what gets better or worse if we choose these different things? And obviously, doing nothing with bush encroachment is the worst case scenario, particularly in the dry years. They wanted us to look at a crop scenario, and if you do dryland crop, it's great for the water table, but it doesn't make you any money unless you plant cassava. So cassava, we found, is very resilient, and I got quite excited about this. And thought this might be an opportunity for an alternative. And obviously, in the wet future, everything gets better than it is currently. But the bottom line is, with an uncertain future, and the climate projections really are pretty rubbish at telling us what's going to happen. If we want to build resilience, we're going to have to find an alternative to the eucalyptus plantations and get them out of there. So I was super excited when I was approached by a company who said, oh, we want to come and do this big cassava project there. It just kind of all happened together. I thought this is a divine providence. And they want to put a factory there to make the starch to export, which is very profitable. There's a high demand for cassava starch globally. And I thought, oh, this is great. This is going to be a game changer. And then they showed me the map of where they want to plant all of these things, and it's in our grasslands. So, yeah, that was my oh bugger moment. So I've commented on their provisional scoping. They are responsible. They're doing a full EIA, and I encourage you all to comment on that. But this is just some smatterings of the results and the things we've been doing there. There's obviously a lot behind there, but I'm coming to you directly with a request from the community saying we need people to help us do rangeland management. We need people to give us tangible solutions on the ground. And they're open, they are willing. Majority of people, they understand the negative impact of the eucalyptus trees. And when you couple that with the potential of climate change and the uncertainty related to that, they really are willing to listen. But you can't just go there and say, take out your eucalyptus without some kind of economic incentive. So yeah, whoever wants to help us up there, this is now an FT on landscape, and I'm very proud to say the gentleman unveiling the first FT on weather station in the area is Nkosi Mamalo from the Mabasa clan. He is hosting the FTON landscape. So I think that's the first time we've had a traditional authority actually hosting a mega research infrastructure in South Africa, which is really cool. So yeah, I was pretty chuffed about that. And so if you want to download the full report, which is massive, you're welcome to. And I just want to say a huge thank you to all our collaborators and the team who made the project possible. That's it.
So we have maybe time for one question. Questions? Was that? Sorry. Yes, one that.
Oh, they really are kind of like thumbs up.
Sue, what's the effect of the boreholes because when we went up there, the proliferation of boreholes and with more and more going in, we understand water extraction and requirements.
All get your calculators out. Okay. 1 hectare of eucalyptus plantations is over 1,600 trees. Okay. Each tree, very conservatively, if you take an average, they can take up to 1,000 liters in the right conditions. But if you say even just 10 liters a day, multiply that by the time, and you'll get an inordinate amount of water. Multiply that by 28,000 hectares, because eucalyptus plantations have doubled in that area. It's orders of magnitude higher than anything that people can be taking. Yes, people are putting boreholes in, but it's absolutely negligible compared to what the Ukes are taking. Thank you for that question.
Okay, thanks. I think we have to move on. Sorry over time there, but there's a big time at the end of the session, 45 minutes for questions. Okay, so our next, and thanks, Sue, very much. It was a great talk. Actually, what Sue's dealing with is this critical thing of who benefits from these things, and we really need to consider this, because is it the local stakeholders or is it external stakeholders? And we have conservation issues around all over Africa which are dealing with these sort of issues. So, yeah, great. The next presentation by Sifwe Zanzi is pre-recorded. Okay, thanks.
Hi, colleagues. I'm Sifwe Zanzi, and I'll be presenting our paper on a topic that we've slightly changed, explaining factors affecting rangeland productivity on South Africa's farms redistributed through the proactive land acquisition strategy. This is one of the modalities that the land redistribution pillar is executed or is implemented. And this study was part of a larger project that was commissioned by DELRAD to the Econometrics unit of the ARC. Just to introduce the topic, I think we all know that a large part of South Africa's land is only suitable for grazing, and this makes livestock production the dominant agricultural producing enterprise in the country. And as such, it contributes half of the total income of agriculture as a whole. Therefore, rangelands are itself natural agricultural resource, and rangeland management is definitely the key to a successful agriculture. Background is also true in the land redistribution component of our three-tier land reform policy, consisting of land restitution, land tenure reform, and land redistribution, which is the focus of our study. Recent analysis shows that about of the 77 million hectares of commercial agricultural land, 25% of it has been redistributed I think we've seen on President Ramaphosa's speech that he mentioned that this statistics from one Sihlobo. In this figure, also we see that 80% of this redistributed land is grazing land. However, the fundamental challenge with land redistribution is the slow pace and poor productivity in the land that has already been redistributed. There have been numerous accounts of what has gone wrong in this, cited in literature. And these are interconnected factors. But among those, there are also it's also cited that beneficiary skills are also a challenge. This poor productivity and paid land redistribution raises concern about countries' food security, especially given the projected demand of animal products and the threat of climate change. And as we know that most communal rangelands are in poor conditions, and that land reform beneficiaries are selected from communal farmers, we don't explicitly know the state of rangeland productivity associated by redistributed or inland redistributed. The objective of this study was to assess the rangeland productivity of the farms that are redistributed in the productive land acquisition strategy. And the other objective was to understand factors associated with the rangeland productivity. This exercise is important, especially in light of policies such as the Conservation of Agricultural Resource Act and achieving the agricultural sector's long-term plan outlined in the National Development Plan and the Agriculture and Processing Master Plan. Here, a sample of 1,761 platforms that we surveyed throughout the country to address our objectives. And these farms or this sample we got it from DALRA database of the farms that were redistributed between 2006 and 2018. This is just a distribution of the farms across the country. As we will see that most of the rangeland share in these farms is quite huge. And when we look at the total, it's about 85% in the country. The rangeland fish farm was rated using a simple scoring system where it was categorized into good, medium, and poor. As we can see the scores there and the system. And this scoring was enhanced by a recent satellite imagery from Google Earth that allowed the farms to be visualized, assessed by an expert panel from the Agricultural Research Council, comprised of a multidisciplinary team of scientists, ranging from agroeconomists, rangeland scientists, animal scientists, and so forth. To address the other objective of the factors influencing rangeland productivity, we use an OLS regression model where the dependent variable is rangeland score and replaced with a set of independent variables. The result, we see that on the summary statistics of variables we've used, selection of variables was not exactly the way you would want it, because when the study was commissioned by DALRA, we were not sure that we will look at this angle, but later on we thought this data can explain important information. As we'll see there, the rangeland score, the mean rangeland score is leaning towards poor. Which is disappointing, and we see that in terms of age, our farmers or beneficiaries mimic the situation in both communal and commercial farming sector. Because from the census of commercial agriculture, the latest one, we will see that about the average farmer there is about 53 years, which is more or less the same as here. Then in terms of rangeland area, we see that it's quite huge, as we've shown earlier. And the rangeland weight, but the mean is about 0.7, which means most farms, 70% of most farms comprised of rangelands. And yeah, we see that farmers there, they have also quite a lot of experience, about 21 years, and the grazing capacity is about 9. But what is disappointing is the years between farm acquisition and occupation, which is about 5 years. And yeah, you ask yourself what is happening within that 5 years before the farm is redistributed. Rangeland capability, not bad. Commercial productivity is very bad. The other factors there which are concerning, it's risk of bush encroachment, which is very poor, and the risk of invasive plants, almost 2, so it's medium. And human capability was not really a concerning issue. Now coming to the categorical variables, you will see that again, most farmers didn't have mentors. See, about 80%. Yeah, and most of the beneficiaries were males, which is also something that resembles what is the situation within the commercial agricultural sector. But yeah, there has been a lot of critiques around this, that land reform is not inclusive and doesn't benefit women. Interesting factors, we see that most beneficiaries in terms of education, secondary and tertiary, which is good. The access to extension, we see that most they get it on a biannual basis, which is bad. We're not part of farmer organizations, which is also not good. Now, the OLS result, we see that there is a set of significant variables among the many variables we across here. One of them is age. There's quite a lot of characteristic age and gender of the food, education. We see that experience the farmer tends to explain the rangeland productivity, the poor rangeland productivity, and we see that rangelands that were managed by older farmers tended to be good condition. And then when we look at rangeland area, we see that it's negative, meaning that the more the area, the better the more the area, the poorer the score, meaning that farmers were not able to look after these huge farms. And this is something that has been widely discussed in literature. We also see there on the rangeland weight as well. And we also see now the negative impact on the years between farm acquisition and occupation. It could mean that between the period of farm acquisition and farm occupation, there could be other factors in there, like neighbors putting in their animals and so forth. And also we see that If the farmer has no mentor, it's also affecting the score. And we see that female farmers or rangeland managed by female farmers tended to be much better. And those farmers that didn't keep farm records, also we see that negatively affect the relationship or the correlation between rangeland productivity. And those farmers that didn't join or were not part of any farm organization that had a negative impact on rangeland productivity. Land continues to be a controversial subject in South Africa and is clouded by misinformation. In this study, we wanted to contribute in this debate by evaluating the rangeland activity. A really commit rangeland productivity of class rangeland is very poor. We saw that it's below, or it was categorized as poor. Factors statistically explain the poor productivity, ranging from farmer characteristics, resource age, gender and education of the farmer, the nature of the rangeland, is the weight in the area of the rangeland, support systems, availability of mentors, and whether a farm keeps record or not, part of a farmer organization or not, and the time taken to hand over the farms. As we currently continuing with land reform, these findings paint a concerning picture about the sustainability of our sector and its resources, which may jeopardize the envisaged growth and job creation that is expected from agriculture. So actions are needed to change the status quo. Firstly, on the actual implementation, farms should receive an necessary post-settlement report from the word go, as stipulated in CAS, and a proper monitoring and evaluation should follow as soon as possible, so that we don't see this issue we see here. With that, thank you, colleagues.
That was interesting talk and an important one to consider. Our next speaker is Matomi, speaking on grass species composition and distribution patterns across the 3 ecological zones of Mpumalanga. Thanks.
Thanks. Thanks very much for the opportunity. My topic is, as you can see, there is grassland species composition, distribution, and patterns and in 3 ecological zones of Mpumalanga province. So grasslands plays a crucial role in providing a wide range of ecosystems, such as microclimate regulation, habitat maintenance, carbon sequestration, erosion control, and feed for livestock. And therefore, understanding the composition, distribution, and in this regard will assist in making sure that we understand the key species that may be considered when doing the field condition assessment and the management systems thereof. So the study was aimed as to determine the grass species diversity in these 3 ecological zones of Mpumalanga, and the objectives thereof were to identify the dominant grass species, develop georeferenced database of the grass species, and compare the diversity of grass species within the 3 ecological zones. So this is how the map looks in Mpumalanga, then with all those 3 ecological zones. So materials and methods, the data took place from June to December 2023 using the app called Survey 123, which is a mobile application for ArcGIS Online. And this method allows for integration of the collected data with other ArcGIS platforms for storage, visualization, and analysis. And for each site, grass species data was collected on a 100-meter transect line at 1 meter intervals using the global positioning systems, readings taken at the start of the point. And thus, the more the abundant species occurs on a site, the higher the chances of that species being recorded. So this is how the form looks. So it starts with the name, the official, who the person was collecting the data. Then when you move forward, you check the district, the municipality, and the farm name, the portion, the size of the farm, and you come to the file type. On this file type, we do 100 points, and as you can check on A, immediately when you press A, the species that comes with A will appear, then you just click, then it will push it there, then you go to number 2 until you reach 100 points. So, and it gives you a space to take a picture of the site, 5 spaces for taking pictures after you have entered the species. So those species are then congested into the system. Then you move again to the last page of the form, which talks about land degradation types. You press the erosion, then it opens to you what is it that you want to know about the erosion on the ground, and if the farm is overgrazed, what is it that you can put there. The alien species, it gives you different alien species that you may come across there. Then you press in. Then if the alien species is not on the ground, you press other so that you can be able to enter the name of the species that you come across. So the data analysis was done using the non-metric multidimensional scaling ordination using the function meter MDS in the vegan package of R software to explore the variation of species across the ecological zones. And in addition, the analysis of similarities, shortenly known as ANOSIM, using the R vegan with 999 permutation was used to perform the similarity of the metrics, and wherein to check if there's any significance between the grasses across 2 or more ecological zones. As you can see, the plots are showing different differences from all those 3 zones using the NMDS, and this one is the ANOSIM one using the R vegan with 9.999 permutations. So the results and discussions, 48 genera and 83 species were found in 172 sites distributed across those 3 ecological zones. The largest genus were the Eraglossis with 13 species, followed by the Aristida with 9 species. The most dominant species were the Cynodon dactylon with a number of counted at 974, Heteropogon contortus with 961, Eraglossis scabula with 929, Thermida trianda with 851, Eraglossis plana with 749, Eraglossis chloramela with 705, Hyperrhenia hita throughout. And I can't read all of them, as you can see up there. So the NMDS plot illustrated the compositional dissimilarity among the grass species from the low feld and the high feld zones, and the distance between some points in and and MDS for the midfield zones reflects the similarity of the grass species with other ecological zones. So the ANOSIM results confirmed the similarity in the grass species across the 3 ecological zones with the significance there. And however, the R value of 0.6 suggests that the effect of ecological zones on grass species occurrence is minimal, although we cannot overrule that some species are driven by their ambient environment. So in conclusion, this kind of results will, however, give a guide to the farmers as to how they should manage their grazing going forward. And data like this will also be used by the National Department in the coming rangeland monitoring, which will be conducted by the ARC. So I would like to thank Dr. Marara Kanye, our GIS specialist in the office, with the assistance with the Survey 123 application for data collection and analysis. I would like to thank you with that.
Okay, thanks, Matui. That was interesting. And we've got quite a bit of time for questions. Sue.
I really liked your data capture system.
Okay.
And yeah, and we quite keen, well, it's in the Department of Science and Innovation white paper to improve scientific literacy in South Africa. So citizen science is becoming a big thing. And I was wondering if you couldn't take the species names and put them into local names, for us it would be the Zulu names, and actually train some people on the ground to go and do these assessments themselves so they can track what's happening. The Latin names freak people out, but everybody's got the Zulu names or the local names for those species. It might be quite a fun app to produce in citizen science world.
I think that's possible because they capture this manually. Then you are able to, maybe in brackets you can put the indigenous name after you put the scientific names. I think that can be a good tool to use because you just use a cell phone, then you go and capture it on your own. At least each and every farmer, they can have a tool like this, they can be able to determine their field condition to see if whether the species which are dominating are of the good ones or bad ones at the end of the day.
Questions?
Thank you, Chair. This is indeed an interesting tool, which I concur with the previous speaker in terms of the user-friendly or make the tool be user-friendly to the local people in the area. However, I'm a little bit interested when you show the map of Mpumalanga. It shows that it's under different climatic condition. Did you on the system have the possibility of put that as a factor that perhaps determines the dominance of a particular grass species in a particular area vis-a-vis the other areas to see that what is the effect of the climatic condition, even in future, perhaps to look at the effect on that on soil, chemical composition, microbial composition, which influences the grass growth and the dominance of a particular grass in a particular area under particular climatic condition. Is that possible?
Yeah, I think it's possible considering the fact that all these places have got different rainfalls at the end of the day. So you know that you'll expect different grass species and different growth forms at the end of the day. And with regard to the other information, I think the GIS guys can be able to filter in some information that can be able to clearly indicate what could be making the difference in terms of all these three ecological zones.
Thank you for the talk. Also on the tool you used to collect the data, is it only the tool, or maybe after collecting the data, it gives you some graphs and a simple dashboard to see what's happening in your area?
Yes, there are some. I didn't put all the information considering the time that I'll be given to present. It gives you the Excel data and also some PDF data with pictures can be able to determine all these differences.
But it doesn't automatically analyze, simply analyze.
It does analyze, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Very interesting talk. I just would like to know, how did you select the areas, which areas that you select to actually go and do the surveys on? Was it farms, was it rangelands, which areas did you select? And what was the criteria that you used for the different areas?
Okay. These are the farms which were selected for a program for animal improvement in the department. Farmers are given an opportunity to apply for assistance with animals at the end of the day. Then our extension office choose these farmers based on the criteria selected for those applicants. Then we go to all those places and check if whether these farmers qualify based on what is available on the ground. Yeah, it's an ongoing process. Each and every year we do that. Yes.
Hi, I just want to maybe something in the pipelines from this data looking at field conditions according to the three ecological zones. If whether is that going to be explored and be shown just to see on a gradient basis how does it change, and also just looking on other questions that were followed up on what are the variables that will contribute to field condition across the three ecological zones. So basically, I would like to maybe if there's any information regarding this program, also calculating field conditions according across the three zones, and how does that look like, if there's any further analysis on that?
So there is that opportunity to go back to these places, because we want to convert them into annual monitoring points, so that each and every year we go there and check if whether, based on the management of the current farmers, is there any change on the species compositions or not. So it's an ongoing thing. Then we'll continue monitoring it to see if whether the management is continues the way we ask them to do or not. Okay, one thing. Sorry, one thing. Can I talk? We're still fortunate that these animals, our animals, cannot go and toy doing service delivery, because if they were to do that, some of us were not going to manage to reach here, because they were going to block our roads, because the menu on the grazing camps are not of good quality for them. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Matomi. Interesting study. Okay, now we have Helga Knutzer on telling us about megacoccuses as a unique disturbance type. And we look forward to that. Thanks, Helga.
Good afternoon, everyone. And in the words of Peter Mashaba, I'm back. Yeah, I presented the project proposal on this project last year with the hope of coming to share some of the results. And sure enough, thank you for the opportunity to do that. So decomposing large vertebrate carcasses are an inherent part of natural ecosystems, and they are also a localized source of nutrient enrichment, and they have strong impacts on the ecosystem biogeochemistry and the community dynamics of vascular plants, microbiota, vertebrates, and also invertebrates. And although I'll be presenting on vegetation dynamics today, this forms part of a larger ecological question because there's limited knowledge on individual carcass effects on the spatiotemporal heterogeneity in terrestrial ecosystem processes. Surprisingly, there's a much clearer understanding for marine ecosystems, for example, where the megacarcasses of whales create these oases of biodiversity and productivity that can persist for decades. Despite being the largest land animal, we know little about how the nutrients from megacarcasses of elephants affect savanna ecosystems. And given that elephant mortality is a natural part of the savanna, and that this mortality can total several hundred individuals annually, the nutrient pulses from about 800 kilograms of carbon, 300 kilograms of nitrogen, and 125 kilograms of phosphorus per 4-ton adult individual carcass, and their impacts are likely to operate at a landscape scale. So these nutrient pulses cause nutrient hotspots, and because of the sheer size of elephants and their ability to persist in the landscape for an extended period of time, they are thought to cause long-lasting legacy effects on the environment and its processes. And these carcass-derived nutrients have furthermore been shown to cause shifts in plant communities. So we therefore anticipated that carcass plots will be dominated by unique sets of species and traits, likely adapted to high fertility soil. So I'll be presenting vegetation data that we monitored on the megacarcasses of 10 elephants on granitic and basaltic soil in the Kruger National Park. At each carcass site, we established 4 transects of 15 meters each in the cardinal directions, and we sampled vegetation within 1 meter squared subplots placed at various distances from the carcass, as you can see there at 1 meter, at 2.5 meters, 5, 10, and 14 meters. And within these subplots, we identified all the life forms, and we also recorded the total percentage cover of vegetation, bare soil, rock, bone, litter wood, and dung. So the carcass sites were considered to be 0 to 3.5 meters away from the carcass, whilst matrix sites were considered 10 meters and further away. And this was done based on observations that we made in the field, where we could see a clear zone of impact in the field. And then later on, preliminary results from soil nutrients corroborated our findings, where we found that soil nitrogen, phosphorus, as well as sodium, manganese, and zinc were higher at the carcass sites. And we also analyzed dominant grass species for plant nutrients, and we also found that sodium, iron, and aluminum were higher at the carcass sites compared to the matrix sites. So plant communities among carcass and matrix sites differed significantly. They were floristically distinct. And there were also no significant variance in dispersion, so we can confidently report these results. And these changes were likely due to the abrupt shifts in soil nutrient concentrations, such as the high levels of nitrogen and phosphorus. Yes, and these pulses of nutrients likely causes the formation of cadaver decomposition islands, and these nutrient-rich bare patches facilitate the recruitment of species that could otherwise not have established there, and they also support vigorous growth during secondary succession. So yes, the changes in species composition, interestingly, were mainly driven by grasses, and the higher levels of soil nitrogen and phosphorus at the carcass sites led to the formation of biogeochemical hotspots, and these hotspots are generally known to be predisposed to form grazing lawns. And then the inherent increase in herbivore activity on these grazing lawns helped to maintain the high productivity in grasses. So I would just like to focus your attention that this is a snapshot in time. We didn't really account for the age of the carcasses. We threw all the data together. So perhaps more of our carcasses were in a mid to a late successional phase, whereas if we were to focus on early succession, the patterns in vegetation might be a lot different. So for the species that contributed more than 2% to the dissimilarity between carcass and matrix sites that were dominant at the carcass sites, they were all palatable species or species with a higher forage quality, and this can be expected on nutrient hotspots. 80% of these species were perennial grasses, although we might have expected more annual species because of the higher grazing or disturbance in that area. And although we know that forbs have the ability to perform better with improved soil conditions, grasses tended to dominate these sites. Also, interestingly, 60% of these species exhibited a prostrate growth form or flat, which we know is an adaptive trait for spatial refuge from grazing. And they also have the potential to provide nutritious and high bulk density forage for the animals. As for the matrix sites, they were mostly associated with perennial tufted grasses. And the lack of high forb abundances might have been due to competitive exclusion effects, where the tall, fast-growing grasses outcompeted forbs of lower stature for resources such as sunlight, water, and nutrients. And then the high levels of productivity and lower levels of grazing, perhaps a bit further away from the carcass, favored the establishment of species with traits such as tufted graminoids with high leaf production. And interestingly as well, most of these species were also palatable, suggesting that areas surrounding these carcasses become zones of fertility and favor the establishment of high-quality forage. So yes, this study definitely shows us that it contributes to a growing recognition that megacarcasses do have significant effects on terrestrial ecosystems, and the effects of elephant carcasses on semi-arid savanna herbaceous vegetation structure and function, demonstrated here for the first time, expands this awareness significantly, given that elephant mortality is a natural phenomenon in the Kruger National Park. So I appreciate that there aren't elephants in many of the rangelands of South Africa, but I thought it might be interesting to see whether mesoherbivores or herbivores of a smaller size would have similar patterns, if the environment would have similar patterns of response to these carcasses. And we are already thinking about such a project at Benfontein, because we have access to the field. We can go weekly, given that these animals will not persist in the environment for that long. So yes, I'm excited to see whether these smaller herbivores or herbivore carcasses would maybe cause mini nutrient hotspots to form in the landscape. But yes, for this case, megacarcasses represent a unique disturbance type, adding to the spatial complexity of semi-arid savannas by creating nutrient hotspots. They have distinct floristics and they have increased forage potential. Elephant carcasses therefore appear to play an important ecological role in the terrestrial ecosystems of semi-arid savannas. They influence herbaceous plant community composition and structure because carcass sites are floristically and structurally distinct from the surrounding matrix. The floristic differences are mainly driven by grasses. However, the role of megacarcasses and then also the smaller carcasses, they deserve more study and attention to explore the responses of other life forms. And then it's important to remember the time component, as we might expect different response patterns over time. And then lastly, megacarcass sites are considered nutrient hotspots, supporting mainly palatable species, and they are therefore considered functionally important for the semi-arid savanna landscape. Thank you. And there's a whole lot of time left.
Thanks, Helga, for kept well to time there, so an interesting talk. We have some time for some questions. First,
well, I guess I thought somebody else. How much of that fertilizer effect might be attributable to scavengers? I mean, your early successional skin was, just streaked with guano, and you think of how long it's going to take vultures and mammalian scavengers to break that down. How much of it could be them and not just the decomposing carcass?
Yes, thank you. That's an interesting question. That's why we have large mammal specialists on the team. They are definitely busy looking into that, and they've got camera traps and data that they will be analyzing on that. But I suppose they could have an initial very big effect on that nutrient pulse.
So my question was actually very similar, and I was wondering whether any of the carcasses that were being investigated were carcasses that had been poisoned, because that would be one way of figuring out whether the scavenger dispersal effect is significant in these areas, or if there's enough of a residue of the carcass to have this nutrient pulse effect, regardless of scavengers and carnivores.
Thank you. As far as I know, none of the carcasses that we went to were poisoned. Most of them died of natural causes, and then many of them were damage-causing animals, which management then had to put down. So yes, but that's an important thing to keep in consideration.
Sorry. Hi, can you hear me? Yes. At the back. How long did that lawn effect, would that be something that you could still see in sort of 10, 15 years? How long does it last? And have you gone back to other lawns to see whether or not this is the origin of them?
Thank you. That's a really good question. I guess that's what we're trying to see through the study, but we were at a site near Shingwetsi in March. I think that elephant carcass was 6 years old, and you could still clearly see a really big zone of impact. So I take it they can last for up to 15 years, yes, but that's what we're trying to see.
Yeah. A question from Debbie. There appears to be a large trampling effect happening initially, creating bare ground around the carcass. Was this quantified?
I don't think quantified per se, but through the vegetation and the functional traits that we saw, we could see that there's a big trampling effect, but I don't think per se that we quantified that.
Okay, thanks for that nice presentation. Did you take into consideration the grasses that might have been eaten by these large animals before they die, which might have influenced the grasses that you identified in those areas where the carcass were?
Okay, so if I understand correctly, are you talking about seeds that maybe have been in the gut? No, I'm not sure that we considered that, but interestingly, in March, unfortunately, 4 elephant bulls got out to eat some mangoes in the surrounding areas of the park, and we could see a lot of mango seeds. Like the first plot was like 100% mango seeds, so that is a really important thing to keep in consideration. Yes, thank you for that.
Just, there are lots of sources of heterogeneity of nutrients and so on. And to be really boring, I would like to suggest, have you also compared what's going on underneath trees and away from them?
Thank you, Willem. Yes, that's a good question. Yes, we are actually considering what's happening in the matrix as well. And we also have some more nutrient studies that, especially in Shingwetsi, we are looking at the Mupani leaves and whether they even differ at the carcass sites compared to the matrix site. So yes, we are considering that.
Thanks. I think we're out of time then. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Helga. That was interesting talk. Okay, we have I think it's our final presentation of the day by Nasifi Nkolisi. Sorry, not getting the pronunciation right. Okay, she'll be speaking on application of multi-scale remote sensing and estimating gross nutrient limitation. Sounds interesting. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Good.
Just a can, but yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Since I haven't been introduced, I am Nasipi Noliso. I am a scientist at the South African National Space Agency and a student at the University of Pretoria. So I'll be presenting a piece of my master's work that I did with my supervisors, Professor Abel Ramuyelo and Dr. Philemon Zele, on the application of multi-scale remote sensing for measuring nutrient limitation in a savanna landscape. So background on the savannas, they cover over 46% of the total land surface area in Southern Africa, characterized by coexistence of grass cover and scattered trees. Thanks to Notando for explaining that there are two types, because I always get that question, which one are you referring to? When I say the dry one, they tell me that they are both dry. So thank you, Notando, for clarifying that. So these savannas, they play an important role as environmental regulators through carbon sequestration, air purification, groundwater storages, as well as a crucial role in agricultural economy and ecotourism through provision of feed for plants used for meat and milk production, as well as a habitat for the far roaming wildlife animals. We know that thousands of people come from all over the world to view our Big Five in the Kruger National Park, contributing to our ecotourism as a country. Now the technology is not technology. Yeah, so something disappeared. The problem that the study tried to address is that South African savanna landscape, they are manifesting signs of degradation, and over 1 million hectares of the degraded land is regarded as non-viable, which has led to a 50% decrease in grazing capacity of this landscape in the year 2016. And one of the problems in addressing such issues is the lack of information on pasture conditions, as denoted by the quality and the quantity of the available vegetation, especially information on vegetation quality that is denoted by biochemical traits. And the obvious reason is that it is not easy to quantify what you cannot see. And it's often expensive to take these samples to the lab and wait for lab analysis for months. By the time you get your results, conditions on the ground have already changed. And if we look at the nitrogen and phosphorus, they are one of the key indicators of grass quality, and their ratio nitrogen to phosphorus is used as an indicator of the limiting nutrients. So when you measure the amount of the available nitrogen, the information that you're getting is how much concentration is there. But when you're measuring their ratio, it tells you which one is limited and which one is not limited, meaning which one is sufficiently available. This technology likes not to technology. So of course, this is just the summary of the problem statement. If these problems, they go unaddressed for a very long time, we know that food availability, especially the milk and meat related products, it will be very low. The demand and the supply curve, they will not meet. And this will lead to poverty, especially for our rural communities who rely solely on agricultural productivity for survival and the savanna provisions, which includes wood, firewood, and grass provisions. So given the background that I've just explained earlier, there is a pressing need to monitor this landscape, to protect them, develop strategic risk management and coping strategies, eradicate poverty, And in order for us to do all that, we need to detect all the threatening situations timely so that we can provide science-backed, actionable information to the decision and policymakers who are involved in the management of the savanna landscapes. So now, of course, I mentioned unavailability of information, but fortunately, thanks to science, we have remote sensing technologies. In the interest of our audience, I think there is a need to describe it a bit. It's just the science of acquiring information about features and objects from a distance. So in this case, the object of interest will be our vegetation. We have satellites, thousands of them that are orbiting our Earth as we're sitting here at about 700 kilometer altitude away from us, and they are collecting information. And some of them, they depend solely on the sun to collect this information. They record the electromagnetic energy that is reflected by the Earth's surface. And then some of them, of these satellites, they emit their own energy. They send a beam of light towards the direction of the Earth, and they will record the reflected energy. And we are able to differentiate between the different features that are on the surface of the Earth because they produce distinct spectral signatures. So we know by the graph that you get that I'm looking at water, trying to point. Okay, don't see any red thing. Okay. Okay, so if you can look, for example, that you produced this one here, the green one, it's a healthy vegetation if you get a graph of that nature. But if you get a graph of this nature that just ends at the blue wavelength, you'll know that you're looking at water because water absorbs most of the electromagnetic energy and it only reflects the blue light. So now the advantage of using these technologies is that they cover large spatial extents. They are less laborious, they are much cheaper. They enable us to see the unseen, meaning that they are able to detect the invisible wavelength because the human eye can only see between 700 and 400 nanometer wavelength. Anything that happens beyond that, we cannot detect with our own eyes. And that's where that's where these nutrients are detected beyond 700 nanometer wavelength. And also these satellites, they enable near real-time monitoring of the Earth's surface, meaning that we are able to monitor our landscapes as if we are watching TV. By near real-time monitoring, I mean that one satellite can go over the same place after every 6 days. And that will it's like every week, you know what is happening on the ground. Unfortunately, we're ending the movie. The aim of our study, therefore, was to evaluate the capabilities of simulated Sentinel-2 models for estimating nitrogen to phosphorus ratios and assess their transferability to satellite images to map grass nutrient limitation. And the questions we try to address are, what are the optimal Sentinel-2 bands and indices for predicting foliar N2P ratio? And can the ASD-derived models be transferred to satellite images to map the spatiotemporal distribution of the N2P ratios? Our study area was the Kruger National Park, there by the Sepi Sands and the Bushbuck Ridge communal lands, the south of the park. We chose the Kruger National Park because of its heterogeneity. We wanted a heterogeneous savanna landscape because the capability of this sensor has been explored mostly on uniform agricultural lands or croplands. So now we wanted to know if can it be as accurate even on the natural environments as it is on the homogeneous environments. So this is what we did. We collected our field data using spectrometers. Spectrometer, it's a sensor that is available here on Earth, so you can collect your data. And if you want to develop a model, it is advisable to first use a spectrometer, get the data that you want, because the distance between the surface and the target is minimized. Whereas if you're using satellite imagery, of course, there's atmospheric interference, absorption of light, but atmospheric particles. So what gets to the sensor is not the total amount of light that was reflected. And then after collecting the spectrometer data, we then simulated the data to Sentinel-2 data sets using the R statistical software, using the main package, the HSDA package. And then we took field measurements of the NNP concentrations. We took them to the lab, ARC labs in Nelspruit to extract the concentrations. And then we developed a model. We did a set of statistical tests to get the optimal model. And then we took that model to a satellite image for mapping. We downloaded our satellite imagery on the Google Earth engine. Sentinel is for free, so you can get it from most of open source softwares. And the reason we chose Sentinel for our study is because Sentinel is equipped with 3 bands in the red edge region. So this RE, this region is where the vegetation starts shooting its reflectance. So changes in vegetation, chemical contents, they are most sensitive in this area. So that's why we chose our Sentinel-2, because it is equipped with 3 narrow bands in this region. And this region, the red edge region, it has been mostly available in commercial sensors. So now its applications by the public have always been limited. So we used the random forest sampling for our data. We did not split our data to the 70-30 because we had few samples, 49 as samples, so it could lead to model bias. Instead, we use the leave one out cross-validation. So these are our results. So if you see here, this is the multispectral data that we collected using the hyperspectral data, and then we converted it to a multispectral data that you see here, using the R statistical software to get the 13 bands of the Sentinel-2 sensor. After that, we developed a model. So the first question was, what are the optimal bands? So from the Sentinel-2 data sets, we found that band 2, which is the blue wavelength, and band 5, which is the first red edge band, as well as the normalized difference between the near infrared and the red edge, and the simple ratio between the near infrared and the red edge are the optimal variables to predict foliar N to P ratios in savanna landscapes. So yeah, we developed our model and we found an R-square value that is very high, that is very accurate. And then trying to interpret this, because a value of 4 to 12 doesn't mean anything to someone who doesn't know anything about remote sensing and N2P values, we further use a thresholding value. So we adopted our thresholding values from Gusawel to 04. There was limited literature on this. We only found one study that predicted N2P ratios in natural savannas. The other study was in wetlands, so we chose this one because if we were to choose thresholding in a wetland and thresholding in a savanna, then we'd be comparing oranges and bananas. So based on this thresholding, we found that if you see any red area there, it means that both nitrogen and phosphorus are limited in that area. But if you see a yellow, it means only nitrogen is limited based on these values. Values above 20, they mean that there is phosphorus limitation. But in our study, there were no signs of phosphorus limitation because there was so much variability in our data. So we had to check what was the cause. And then we also checked the vegetation cover in the area, in this area over these years. We noticed that our model, it picked up areas that didn't have any vegetation cover. It picked them up as areas that are phosphorus limited. So in conclusion, we observed a consistent limitation of nitrogen in that area. And we found that red edge Sentinel-2 indices derived from the red edge position and the near infrared bands, they are optimal for N and P, N to P ratio estimation. And also we addressed the lack of remote sensing variables significant for estimating N to P phosphorus because they were not, they are so limited. We had to do a set of tested indices where we developed our own indices outside the literature to test if they work based on the background information, where we know that P and N are absorbed and reflected in these wavelengths. And we conclude that Sentinel-2 can be adopted as a cost-effective and an accurate tool by decision makers and policymakers to effectively manage and protect the vulnerable landscapes. Now that we've developed this marvelous model with all these statistical accuracies that are very nice, what do we do with that information? So now we're taking this research, working with SANSA, the South African National Space Agency, to develop more natural resource management decision support tools, where we mapping various types of vegetation quality and quantity variables over the vulnerable landscape, responding to goal number 15 of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. However, as SANSA, we have access to satellite data and all that and the expertise, but our field data is limited. And to train these models and to calibrate these models and to ensure that these models are accurate, we need a lot of field data. And during this conference, I observed that people are working on the field. Field data is not scarce. We just don't know where is it. So this calls for collaboration. SANSA has the satellite data freely available. Everyone in this house, they have their field data mapping something. Let's match the data and respond to goal number 15. We need to protect, restore, promote and promote sustainable use of the terrestrial ecosystem. And this is not a one man's job. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nasifi. Very interesting talk and lots of useful results there. We have half an hour of time question for, so let's ask Nasifi first and then not just for Nasifi, but after Nasifi we can go to other, if there are other questions for the previous presenters, we'll go to those. But first, let's start with questions for Nasifi.
Thank you, Chair. This is a very interesting study, rather. However, I'm a little bit concerned about the, I don't know, should I say, for lack of a better word, I don't know, should I say accuracy or the time in which the data was collected? Because, for example, a book that was written by Pozaglu somewhere in probably 98, if my memory serves me correct, it's indicate that in South Africa particularly, we've got a shortage of phosphorus, we've got a shortage of nitrogen, and so forth. Hence, in animal feeding, there is a need of phosphorus leak almost throughout the year due to addressing that phosphorus, selenium, and so forth. Now, in your study, I think in one of the picture you were indicating that if I got you correct, that there was no shortage of phosphorus. I don't know either the system pick the metabolic process where the ATP change into ADP during the photosynthesis process, which it might pick the release of phosphorus in particular during that metabolic process. Then perhaps it might be interpreted incorrectly to say this is what is available in the forest, not unless I didn't get you correctly. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. So this map, what it means is that if your values are less than 10, it's nitrogen limitation. If they're between 20 and 10, then they are both limited. What the over 20 values mean is that there are no areas that are solely limited by phosphorus, but not limited by nitrogen. However, we will remember that phosphorus, it is in very small quantities in grass. Literature says that it is 10 times smaller than nitrogen. So if you're picking it up from space, then it becomes a problem. That's why there is even less of literature in this type of work, because when you're trying to detect phosphorus from satellite data, then it becomes very tricky because of that. However, there are areas where both nitrogen and phosphorus were not available, but there is no area that had phosphorus but not had nitrogen, which is solely that had nitrogen but did not have phosphorus. So what it picked up is that there is nitrogen limitation, and both nitrogen and phosphorus limitation. However, there is no area that has sufficient nitrogen but lacks only phosphorus. That's what they imply. However, it might not be accurate because it struggles to detect phosphorus alone.
Thank you very much. I'm always an advocate of seeing people who work on remote sensing getting into the field. So well done on that. And your spectrophotometers, between SEON and FTON, we have a number of long-term sites, and part of the reason for those is so that they can be used as validation sites. But we're short of money, so I was wondering if SANZA can maybe sponsor some spectrophotometers at these long-term sites, and then we can make that data freely available to anybody who wants it, including SANZA.
That sounds like a strategic question, and I'm in no position to answer.
In other words, you say it's above your pay grade to answer that question. I'm just curious about the variation you're showing in those 4 maps there, because this is interannual or interseasonal, between year changes, right? No, go back to the previous one that you had. So it looks like in 2018, 2021, you had predominantly nitrogen limitation, and then 2019 and 2020, there was suddenly an increase in phosphorus limitation because you've got an increased area of co-limitation. And I'm curious, how can there be such interseasonal variation, particularly in phosphorus, across such large areas?
So one thing I noticed is that in areas where there is no vegetation, it picks that they are both limited. So now that was a gap in our study to say that including information on vegetation cover and textural information would have improved these results, of which that's what we're currently working on with the ongoing research. And also including information on other factors like your climate, your fires, because sometimes in 2018 there will be no fire sky, in 2019 there's a fire sky, and you'll pick that they are both limited. Yeah. Why are they not ending?
Are you perhaps aware of the study also conducted by Professor Mantunga in the northern plains of the Kruger National Park, where he used hyperspectral remote sensing to map olivifoliar nitrogen. But I wondered whether if you did, it would be worthy to compare results. And did you also maybe consider masking out the non-vegetated areas to improve the accuracy of your model?
I think that's a suggestion.
And a question.
And a question.
Whether you considered masking out the non-vegetated areas in your image?
Yes, during the image processing and analysis, we did mask the non-vegetated areas, which is, we didn't consider the bare soil, but we considered built-up areas to mask them out. Yeah. Yes, I looked at that. It was part of my literature review to support the results.
Through you, this just a comment or perhaps a suggestion if possible. I think looking at the data that you collected, which is interesting, I think if it's perhaps you can either use infrared data analysis on some samples in the area, looking at the mineral composition of the vegetation, different vegetation, then correlate that with your data. Perhaps we can see if ever is there any possible gap so that whatever that we are reporting, it will be correlated with actually what is in the plant itself, if you were to do without following the normal lab analysis that you are running from. That takes time. But if you use the infrared, you can immediately collect the sample and analyze it. Then 6 seconds, you're able to get your data. Thank you.
It's the reason why we need to collaborate. Yeah, finally, thank you so much.
Okay, do we have any other questions for any of the other presenters? We have something online here.
Yes, I've got a question for Helga from Sigrun. She would like to know about trampling. Would the trampling effect be enough over time? Sorry? Cause increased soil compaction, if this could possibly determine the species composition in the longer term.
Yes, thank you for that. One of our colleagues, Tertia Stradom, had this McAfter, I can't remember the name, but she looked at the compaction at those similar distances where we did the vegetation sampling. So yes, those results I don't think have been analyzed yet, but yeah, we have looked at the compaction, and I think it will have an effect on the species that we get there. But that's waiting to be seen.
Who else has got the mic? Who's got the mic at the moment?
Yeah. Hey.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, William.
Just for the fire people, we recently had these terrible incidents where people were killed by grass fires and livestock have been killed by grass fires. That would have been outrageous many years ago. What's happened? What's changed? Are people naive about fires? Or have the properties of fires changed? Or what's going on? And under what circumstances are we getting fires that are so lethal that they kill both livestock and people? I'd be very keen to hear what Dankwitz has got to say, for example, or anyone else from the fires talks this morning. Thanks.
Does someone want to respond to that? Who's one of the fire people? Does anyone have an answer to that?
Kevin's passed the microphone to me. I was hoping he would answer. I don't know if there is an increase in livestock dying from fires. I think it's just reported on more, but I can't say. I really can't say. I don't know if there's any. I don't know if there's an increase in fires. Are there? And the severity of fires? Does anyone know? Yeah.
Sure.
Way of understanding green fires and circumstances. Fires over change. Is this a changing response of people?
Yeah, Sue, do you want to comment there?
Maybe to give a comment to that, I've realized that people are now more aware or rather educated about fires. They know the dangers of fire. Speaking from my side and working on fire, we promote the coexistence of FPAs. So at least they get to educate the people who own maybe big lands and the communities surrounding those areas which possibly get accidental fires. So I believe that people are more aware, and also the changes in the climate weather conditions are also affecting the fires that we're getting. So yeah, it's education and climate change, I think.
Yeah, and the climate change issue I think is interesting and hasn't been completely sorted, but something that I've been really keenly watching in some regions of the US in certain seasons. We're just getting these explosive, extensive fires, and it has to do, I think, both with weather being hotter and drier. So as Matthew was showing, at certain moisture contents, that fuel just isn't quite as combustible. But when in the U.S. in the plains where we're having less snow cover during the winter, you have just these dead grasses that are now very dry much earlier in the season than they would have been. And with climate change, I think that there's with the world generally just being warmer, there's a lot more energy in the atmosphere. And so if it's drier, you have more convection, storms have more intensity, but it's drier, so they're more likely to be dry lightning strikes followed by these really intense post-frontal winds. So there's really no one single factor, I think, but it's just general dryness and intensity in the atmosphere just makes these fires much more difficult to stop, much more likely to start and more difficult to stop. So I think there's some tactical components for fire services to address these, and that the conventional ways to just drive up to a grass fire and start spraying on it aren't as effective anymore. Really need to think about zooming out indirect attack, because you can't go after these fires as directly as you might have had just ran out and put out a felt fire before.
Thanks. I can maybe just add, in that Boston area where those grass fires were, I think it was like 2 weeks ago. In that part of KwaZulu-Natal, we'd had an exceptionally wet 2 years. Particularly the last 2 summers were really wet. And then when the rain stopped this year in about towards the end of March, April, they stopped a little bit early, and it was a very hot and dry winter up until then. So a lot of biomass, and it was very dry and the conditions were quite bad. But I also think that cattle numbers in some areas are actually dropping. So I think there's less consumption of grass, of biomass. I think we've got high fuel loads, and in that particular area, high fuel loads and very dry conditions. But they did also use fire bombers for a grass fire, which they don't often do in that area. They keep the aircraft for fighting plantation fires, but they were using it on a grass fire. So it must have been really quite a rough fire that they had.
Maya? Okay. A couple of things. I want to follow on with this response to William's question, and then I've actually got a question for Susan as well. So I'm very fortunate as I move towards retirement to have some of my best grad students ever. And one of my students is working on the human dimensions of the Bastard Fire from 2011, which hasn't been looked at. And his fundamental title of his thesis is The Production of Destruction. So we often think about what's happening to the ecosystems and why are fires more destructive? Well, one of the reasons is because we make them so. We build into fire-prone areas, on top of which in the Bastard Forest, it's an anthropogenic forest that was generated over many decades for timber production, and then people go and build into these fire-prone areas, and then are surprised when their houses burn down. And by the way, after that highly destructive fires, guess what the response was to try and mitigate the problem? Plant more trees. And so they've actually increased the fuel load following that fire, and they haven't changed anything at all in terms of how to redevelop the areas that have been destroyed. So the bottom line is they've just set it up for another conflagration that is going to happen, and it's going to be more destructive, and likely more people will be killed. People were killed in that first fire. So I think part of it is also that people, the way we develop is inconsistent with the risk factors of the areas that we build into. It's not just fire, it's flood-prone areas, it's earthquake-prone areas, any place you want to think about. We seem to be developing more and more into these areas instead of saying there's some areas that we either should not be developing into, or we develop in a way that is less susceptible to fire, or for goodness sake, let's put some fire-resistant elements into our homes. And one of the simplest ways to protect your home from a fire is to ensure that vents do not allow embers into the house, because most houses that are burnt down in a fire actually burn from the inside outwards by embers getting into the roof, and then from there they start burning inside outwards, not from the outside in. It's something that a lot of people don't understand, an easy fix. Anyway, so I think it's a complex issue in terms of, why are fires more destructive, and why is there more devastation associated with fire? It's both biophysical, but it's also social. For you, Susan, the question I had was in terms of those eucalypt plantations. I don't know what it is. And it's again the same sort of thing. We're producing systems that are highly destructive. Why do we keep planting exotic trees into areas where they're highly destructive in so many ways? So the question, though, is there any effort to try and eliminate those eucalypt plantations if they're sucking up so much water? It's a big problem in the Drakensberg as well. You know, that's affecting a lot of the river systems that flow through the Kruger. And so anyway, what's happening about that aspect?
Thanks. Great question. Just one to answer, William. All I can say is that the temperature records that we're getting from Cathedral Peak ever since we started monitoring every single year has been above the historic mean. So we are definitely getting hotter. In terms of the eucalyptus plantations, many people have tried to go in quite hard. So DWS, our Department of Water Affairs and Sanitation, have been trying to curb the extent of small growers, you know, extending those things, and have been met with violence threats. I mean, if you go in there and you're in a DWS vehicle and you're telling people to rip out the ukes, you are likely to get shot, which is why we took a very different approach and we listened first. And there wasn't a single workshop or situation or thing where we went in and said eucalyptus are bad. We said, what are your key concerns? Everybody says water. Why is the water table going down? And they'll list a whole lot of reasons, and eventually everybody comes to water. So the people on the ground know that eucalyptus is bad for the water resource. There are very few people benefiting from the eucalyptus, but they're very powerful people. And you have the forestry companies who are feeding this fetish because they've built these wonderful pulp machines that can consume immense tonnages per second of pulp. And they're after pulp, and their motivation is the shareholder price. So what's driving this is shareholder returns on multinational companies. So external people are benefiting, and all the risk and the burden is being carried by the people internally. So there are governance issues in place. All three Nkosi's we've dealt with have prescribed that there will be no more increase in eucalyptus. And some people are listening to that. So there's a change in the mindset, which has also come in through people understanding that there's a climate impact as well. It's not just the trees. But in order to have an effect on the ground, we have to replace those trees with something else. The other confounding, so that you've got the formal plantations, which is Manzangwenya and Mbazwan, and they're relatively large, but there's been a doubling of eucalypts outside of those. And the formal plantations are gazetted as forestry plantations. It's government state land leased to Ngonyama Trust. If we want to change that, we have to get all three Nkosi's to agree to deproclaim that as forestry land. Then we need to write a letter to DFFE to say, please, can you remove this as gazetted land for forestry and reproclaim it as agricultural land? And that's something I'm now strongly advocating for. Because we need to get that governance switch and the policy switch, and that the change in the categorization of that. The good thing is the companies that are now doing the work on the ground, basically that are managing the Manzangwenya and Mbazwan plantations, they're not affiliated to a sawmill or a pulp mill. So they don't mind if they can find an alternative market that provides them with more profit, they will switch. But the forestry companies are really trying very hard to keep forestry in there. But I'm about to write to FSC based on some of the information we've received from the surveys, which proves quite clearly they're pushing forestry there, and they know very, very well that we're way below any water licensing capacity in that system.
Another question? So, she's got the mic. Oh.
Can I? Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that one incident that we had in Kruger, the people that died during that 2000. So what happened there is during that time we had a hands-off approach of our fire management, where our manager said they will go see what is the impact of natural fires, lightning fires. So, in areas like the area where it occurred was Pretoria's Kop, which is one of our highest rainfall areas for once, and also very high fuel loads. So during that year, there wasn't any a proper, management burns in that area. So there was a very high fuel load. And then we had these harvesters, the people that came to harvest the thatching grass. And they were actually camping. They had a campsite inside the park. So what happened then, it was all wrong conditions, exactly what we said, very hot day, strong winds, and the tourists started the fire, and there was just no way that these people could get away from that fire. So we really learned out of that really hard lesson. So from there onwards, we changed our whole fire management, strategies, where we now create a mosaic system. So we burn different times of the year, different areas of the park, to create this natural patchy burned areas and a more of a heterogeneity that we create, and more natural, areas that's already burned, so that we don't have these runaway fires that we had that year. And also with the high rainfall, that also plays a big role, because that just, increase your fuel loads. So luckily in Kruger, we're not scared to put fires in, management fires. So we're very proactive. So if we see these areas with very high fuel loads, our people, managers, fire managers go in with our fire teams, and they would actually make sure that they keep those fuel loads, low in those areas, that we don't have this runaway fires again.
Richard, yeah, I've got the mic here. Just a quick question for Helga. Helga, with the elephant carcass, or the influence of carcasses on nutrient cycling and nutrient distribution, if we look at agricultural systems, we're always taking cattle off, or sheep, or whatever it is. No carcass ever lies in the veld. Are we mining the veld? Are we reducing the amount of nutrients in the veld? And are we homogenizing the veld by not having these patches of dead carcasses littered around?
Thanks, Kevin. I would say so, but I guess that's a gap in the research that we have to look at. But from the results that we found, I think you are. Yeah, definitely. I think if you were to leave them there, they would, like I said, cause these mini nutrient hotspots in the landscape, and also, of course, contribute to the heterogeneity.
Yeah, I think it's an important question that for further research, because it seems to be coming up a bit lately. Someone asked me that question the other day as well, and I thought I don't know. So we need. No, but I mean on cattle farms and things as well. How's it affecting nutrients in the long term? So interesting to see. First question from.
Yes, I also have a question for Sis Helga here. How do the effects of rainfall on mega carcasses decomposition and nutrient cycling vary in different seasons and years?
Yes, thank you for that. So that is why we are looking in the southern parts of the Kruger, where the rainfall's a bit higher compared to the northern parts. I've only been to the northern parts in March, but we can already see that we call it a carcass sphere, like this impact of the elephant carcass. They remain much longer intact in the northern parts where the rainfall is a bit lower. So yes, of course, with increased rainfall comes increased leaching into the soil. So we're thinking that the less rainfall in the northern parts, less leaching of those nutrients into the soil, keeps these areas intact for much longer. But yes, that's still an ongoing thing that we are trying to tease out. But thank you for that.
Just on the nutrient story, that's a very old question. It goes back to the 1920s and earlier. And the reason why people still ask it is because of, I don't know. We know that it doesn't matter. Removing cattle does not remove enough nutrients to have any impact on productivity. We had a look at this in Shishlui because we had a lot of American and European researchers, and they're obsessed with nitrogen. They even have the Tillman's, R-star idea about nitrogen. Nitrogen as an equilibrium source, which is gradually drawn down over time. Our nitrogen hits a pulse. When you get the first rainfall, there's a massive pulse of nitrogen released. That's the way our nitrogen works. It's not a pool that gradually dwindles. Maybe up in the Drakensberg, we haven't found the place where our nitrogen cycle behaves like, the contemporary. But our nitrogen comes in a massive pulse. Our nutrients come in pulses. So I believe it's a fantasy. But keep going. But I'd be really skeptical.
Yeah.
And on the fire thing, I'd just like to add, we really need to try and have a decent analysis of what causes these extreme and dangerous events, because we want to use fire as a tool. It's going to become more important as a tool, for example, for clearing bush. And we need to understand how to cope with fire under extreme conditions. So what's going wrong? Why are people being killed? What are their conditions? We've heard it's fuel. We've heard it's weather. Is it cultural ignorance on how to fight the fires? We need to have a decent analysis, please. And where better to start from than the Grassland Society? Thanks. Yeah, end of my complaint.
So in that point of view, we can also bring in remote sensing. And I think looking back at those, using remote sensing to look at fuel loads and getting in climate data and modeling this would probably be using already the events that we've had. It would be interesting to see. But I think one of the key things is going to be these big rainfall events, very wet seasons, and too much fuel developing. So I think that's an obvious one that's going to come out in these models. But yeah, and that as well. Yeah. No, but you can get it from your climate station stuff. Yeah. Okay. Sue, did you want to?
Yeah, I just want to, on the fire story, one of the things that is becoming more and more difficult to do is to get your brakes in early enough before you've got a heavy fuel load, because the onset of frost is happening later and later and later. And this is a question I've got for the rangeland ecologists, like when we can't get fire breaks in to manage these systems because your frost comes basically in mid-July, by then you can't actually put in brakes because you're going to burn everything down. And I think that, I know in the Drakensberg with the management burns, they're really struggling to get those fire breaks in when it's still safe, before things get too dry. So there's a link with frost as well, I suspect, in the temperate grasslands.
Yeah, I think time is up unless there's one really question someone has. It's into lunchtime. Thanks to all the presenters. That was great. I think a very good session.